everyone, it's Kelly Cahoot and I'd like to welcome you to the Honeybee Stamps YouTube channel. Today I have a back to basics video for you, but today's kind of extra special. We're going to walk through how to create a card from start to finish. So I'm going to use some of our Honeybee Stamps pattern paper, some of our amazing dies, some of our tools, and I'm going to start out today going through all the supplies that we'll need to create this cute card here behind me. And then we're going to get started on creating that card from start to finish. So I hope you'll stick around and join me. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is paper. Now for the card base, which is actually going to be the base and the card part, not all the pretty toppings, I am using Nina 110 pound solar white cardstock. And this is just a heavy duty cardstock that you can not only use for your card bases, but also to stamp, to die cut. You can Copic color on this. It's just a great bright white basic. If you're interested in cardstock, Honeybee does sell these in 10 packs, and so it's an inexpensive way to try this out. Now I've chosen some solid color cardstock that's going to pair with our pattern paper. You can choose any color you like. I just try to, pull out one of the colors from the pattern to make that pop out to be a little accent. Now let's look at our pattern paper pads that we're using today. This is the Happy Hearts pattern paper pad, and I'm going to use the scattered heart design. And I love this because it coordinates perfectly with the Happy Hearts gingham paper pad. And so when I am choosing patterns, I like to choose one that's maybe a little more busy, like the bigger, different colored hearts, and then choose one that is a great basic like the gingham. Okay, next we need something to cut down our paper, and this is just a Fiskars paper trimmer. You can use whatever type of paper trimmer that you like. I like this because it folds up. It has the little opening, which is in the guide, the arm there that you can lift, and then the blade slides up and down. It has really easy to read numbers across the top, and as you can see, I can cut a really large sheet of paper down with this size paper trimmer. So you'll just need to choose what you need and for what size paper you're working with. Now we'll need something to fold up our card base, and this is a Score Buddy, and you can see there is a little bone folder that goes in the top. I've had this little Score Buddy for years and years, and they hold up wonderfully. They have these little measurements at the top, and then the guides or the little slits that are in the plastic that you can put your bone folder down into when you have your paper and score that at whatever measurement that you need. So you can fold just a basic card base, or you can do some really fancy designs and do different folds and gate folds and all that, depending on where you cut and fold your cardstock. So here, I'm just going to fold this, but this is going to be a top folding card base, and I'm going to score that at 5.5. And so I fit the bone folder down in the groove. It leaves that nice embossed line. And then I can press that down with the Honeybee Stamps Teflon bone folder. Now, as you can see here, it is creased beautifully. The bone folder folds all that down. It doesn't crack or bend your paper, and there is no residue left or shininess left on your paper from that Teflon bone folder. Next, we're going to need something to stamp with. This is the Misty stamping tool, and as you can see, it has a clear door so you can apply your stamps to the door, your paper on the inside, and then press down. Now, the beauty of the Misty is being able to stamp over and over again in the same spot. Now this is just a basic acrylic block. You apply your stamp to the acrylic block, dip it in your ink, and then apply the stamp onto your paper. Now the hard thing with an acrylic block it makes it difficult to stamp multiple, like if you didn't get good coverage and you needed to stamp again. So this is the stamp set that we're going to be using today. This is our heart buzzword. All of our buzzwords have that big scripty word and then lots of mix and match sentiments. This is the coordinating die set. It has 3 dies that are going to cut out a large shadow shown here in white. the little bubble or shadow in red, and then that scripty word. Now this one is really cool, but has some little extra hearts included in that die set. We're going to use this, and then to cut out our pattern paper from the gingham and from our little heart paper pad, we're going to use our Sweet Stacks rectangles. Look at all those rectangle sizes and the Sweet Stacks circles. These die sets are great basics. They make it super easy to choose the size die that you need depending on what kind of project you're doing. Now, to cut out all of my small die cuts, so my bitty buzzword, the little sentiments and things, I love to use our bitty buzz cutter. You can see how it has amazing platform there that they fold down. There are two plates that you'll need to use, so you can see one is thicker than the other. I like to lay my little slim plate down first, and then you're going to lay your paper and your die, run that through your machine, easy peasy, and then all those little die cuts and things are ready to go. You'll see me use this later on in the video. Next are the inks for today. This is our Be Creative Intense Black ink. It is alcohol marker friendly. So if you're going to get into Copic coloring or anything like that, this is a great ink. This is our Be Creative Clear Watermark and Embossing ink. If you like to use embossing powders and heat emboss your sentiments or designs onto your cards, this is a great embossing ink. For my adhesive today, I'm going to be using the Be Creative Precision Tip Liquid Glue. I am going to take the lid off here. You can see that nice precision tip, but we also have our cute little Be Creative glue stand. Now the lid goes down into the stand. You press it firmly on the inside, and then you never lose your lid because it stays in this cute little stand. You can add your glue in there. The glue is always going to stay into the tip, so it's right there ready to use. Now this is our precision tip tweezers. You have to squeeze those to open it, so it acts as like an extra pair of hands. You'll see me use that, as well as our die pick here. This is a just great tool to have. I use this for everything from removing the paper out of my dies to kind of poke that out, to adding gems and sequins and things like that onto my projects. And then of course I showed you our awesome Teflon bone folder. Can be used for all types of things. If you need to give paper a little squeeze down, that is great. Now this is our Be Creative pressure tool, and you use this by sliding it across the MISTI door. The bottom has a nice pad of felt on it, and this is going to give your stamping even pressure instead of having to move your fingers around and then add pressure onto certain parts of the lid. This gives it more coverage by sliding it back and forth, and I'll show you how to use that. Now it's time to jump into card making, and this is the card that we're going to create with all of those basic supplies. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to trim down our 110-pound cardstock for our card base, and there's a couple of ways to do this for an A2 size card. Now A2 size cards are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. You can have either a top folding card, which you're going to hold your paper vertical and put that into your paper trimmer. Now I'm going to slide the paper over to 4 1/4 because that's the center of this paper. So you're going to get 2 card bases out of each of these sheets of paper. I believe that that's why this size is so popular with card makers, is because you're going to get 2 cards out of each piece of cardstock. Now, to fold this, a top folding card, you're going to slip your paper into your score board or your score buddy. I'm going to go down to 5 1/2 because it's going to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I've made my scoreboard using those little areas or the little slits inside that scoreboard. I pull it out. You can kind of fold it on that embossed line and then press that down with the other end of your bone folder. Now, you could always just fold your cardstock in half like this, and I'm going to show you the difference. So you can kind of fold it in half now that you have it trimmed. You can then kind of take your Teflon bone folder and fold it up. it's just not going to give you the nice top, the nice top that doesn't have creases and doesn't have bends in it. The Score Buddy or some type of scoring tool is just going to make it nice and crisp and neat. Okay, for the next style of card, let's just do a great basic side folding card. And this time you're gonna slide your paper into your trimmer, not vertically, but horizontally, and you're gonna slice down the middle that way. And the middle for this style card is 5.5. So I'm gonna find the 5.5-inch mark on my measurement tool up there, slide my blade, and now I've got two of those sheets of paper that are ready to be scored and folded into side folding card bases. Now for this one, I'm going to slip that in and I'm going to find the 4.25 mark. I'm going to slip in my bone folder, run it down that mark. I'm going to fold it in half and then again use the other end to really crease that down. And by scoring it using a bone folder, it's going to prevent the warping and cracking of your cardstock on that folded edge. So it just makes it nice and crisp and neat, and it really stretches out and moves around the fibers in the paper for the crease for you to get a really nice pretty fold. Okay, so let's go ahead and fold this one. Again, I'm going to find the 4.25 mark. I'm going to slide that down that open space and then I can fold it up. Take the other end of my bone folder and then really crease and slide that across. And then I have a really nice flat, nice and neat card base all ready to go. Now I have two card bases that are side folding and two card bases that are top folding. Again, you're going to get two card bases out of every one sheet of cardstock. Now let's talk about our stamps that we're going to use today. Now these are our bitty buzzwords. You can see that this is the fall edition that has like home and pumpkin and coffee and all things cozy. And this is our original buzzword size heart. That's the one we're going to use, but I want to show you the size difference. So when you're looking on the website, you can see, or you'll know, that the regular buzzwords are larger size and the bitty buzzwords are smaller. So we're going to use this big buzzword heart today, and then we're going to fill in and do a little sub-sentiment with some of the mix and match words. Now I am going to use the die set to create a cute little stacked die cut sentiment like we have here, and we'll get into all that as we move on. Now the busy buzzword set does have coordinating dies that go with it as well, but instead of having the 3 dies to create a stacked sentiment, it only has 2. It has a basic shadow and then each scripty word. So let's get into some different stamping. First, let's start out with using our acrylic block and our Be Creative Intense Black ink. We'll also use the Misty here in a minute, and we'll kind of look at the difference between the two. So I'm going to pull off the large heart scripty word, and you just gently peel that back, apply it to your acrylic block and make sure it's tapped down nicely. And then I'm going to take that Be Creative Intense Black ink, and I'm going to make sure that I tap, tap, tap the surface of that stamp all into that ink pad. And I'm going to hold it up, and you'll be able to see here in just a second. Do you see where you can get good cover? You can kind of see through the stamp to make sure that all of that stamp is really well covered. Now, instead of setting down your acrylic block and picking it right back up, I suggest holding it down, pressing it into the paper, and letting that ink do its thing and kind of seep into the cardstock. That's where it's going to give you the best stamping if you're using an acrylic block. Okay, look, we have a great impression. It's a little bit light. It's a little bit gray. There's some little pieces that you can see didn't cover as well. That's okay. You can totally use that and add that to your card. Now let's look at the difference that a Misty stamping tool is going to give you. I'm going to slide in the same piece of cardstock. I'm going to take a cloth and just kind of clean up some of the excess ink that's left on that stamp. And then I'm going to peel the stamp off of the block and then add that into the Misty. So I'm going to set it down on that piece of paper. I'm going to close the Misty door, and that Misty door is going to act kind of like the acrylic block. So it's going to pick it up and hold it in place. Now I can take the same ink And again, we're going to tap, tap, tap all over the surface of that stamp. Make sure that I have really good coverage. I want those letters to be all inked up nicely. And then when I think it's ready, I can close the door to the MISTI. And I can either press with my fingers like so, or this is where you may want to pull in your Be Creative pressure tool. That's going to slide all over the surface of the door of the MISTI and give a really good coverage. Now look, that's the first inking there. You can see that those are very similar. They're they look almost the same, but this is the nice part about the MISTI. I can ink it up again, stamp it again, and do you see how nice and crisp it's getting this time and darker black? If I want it even darker than that, I can ink up my stamp again, close the door. I can use the little pressure tool again to slide over it, and then wow, look at the difference in how those stamp. So the top one is with the acrylic block that it's really hard to line up and to stamp that over and over again to get it darker. The MISTI is going to make it where you can stamp your images over and over again so you get really good coverage before you're ready to color that or die cut it or whatever you want to do. Now, let's do a little bit of heat embossing with the sentiment. So I'm going to put away that intense black ink. I'm going to use the same sheet of cardstock, so I'm just going to slip that right back down into my MISTI. And I did wipe down the stamp, but I left a little bit of the stamp or the ink residue on the stamp because it's going to make it easier for you to see the embossing ink when it goes onto the paper. Normally, embossing ink is completely clear, so you have to make sure that you really look at it and get it really good and glossy. Now, anytime you heat emboss, you want to use some sort of anti-static tool. Embossing powder is very filled with static, and so those little particles will get everywhere if you don't use anti-static powder. Now this is our embossing and watermark ink, and if I ink that up and close the door of my MISTI, you'll be able to see this, which normally is a clear ink, because I've left the residue on that stamp so you can see where I'm stamping it. Normally, if you're stamping on a dark colored cardstock, the cardstock would get darker. If you're stamping on white, you really have to look to make sure that whatever the image is or the sentiment is that you're stamping in embossing ink has really good coverage. You can see my head there. I'm getting down there and making sure that that heart word is really nice and covered. Now I'm going to use the Brutus Monroe, and this is the Poinsettia Glittery Embossing Powder. I'm going to cover where we stamped, and you can see I really don't have a whole lot of fallout or where the embossing particles are sticking all over that piece of paper. There is a little bit, and so I'll show you how to remedy that. I'm going to make a little funnel here and pour the excess embossing powder back into the jar. Close that up so I don't make a mess. And then all you need to do is take a dry paintbrush and kind of just scooch away any little leftover particles that you may have near that sentiment. And you want to do this before you heat it up with your heat tool. After it's heated up and set, it's kind of too late to make sure that those are moved away. So just use a dry paintbrush and scoot those away, and then this is ready to heat up. So first I'm going to take it towards the back and kind of get everything nice and hot, and then I'll start working the heat all over that sentiment, and I just want to make sure that this is melting and getting smooth. And I'll hold this up here in just a second so you can see the finished sentiment once we have stamped that with our embossing and watermark ink, adding embossing powder, and then heat setting that. Now, anytime you heat emboss with embossing powder, that stays wet almost like paint for just a little bit. So you'll want to kind of set that aside and let that set up and kind of cool off before you die cut it or add it to your card or anything like that. But you can see the nice glittery glossy area of that sentiment. And so that just gives you a look at different ways that you can stamp and get different looks for your card projects. Okay, so now I'm going to stamp the sentiment for our card. I am putting in just a scrap piece of white paper, and I have chosen one of the little sub-sentiments that is in that heart buzzword stamp set. And this says, "You have my," and then we're going to add the die cuts with that to finish out the greeting, which says heart. So I'm going to do this just like we did earlier when we were stamping with the Misty. I put my cardstock down. I'm going to use my intense black ink, and I'm going to tap, 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 tap right there on the surface of the stamp. Close the door. A little tip and trick. When you have very fine, dainty sentiments like this one, it's not thick and it's not bold. You don't need to add a lot of pressure. All you need to do is tap your fingers over the top and you'll get a really good impression. Next, let's do our die cuts. So I have the coordinating dies here. Here's the pattern paper that we're going to kind of pick out. Here is the gingham Happy Hearts paper pad. All of this perfectly coordinates. So let's get all of our paper pulled out that we need first. So first off, I'm going to make the kind of star of the card, these beautiful multicolored hearts. So I'm going to pull that out of my paper pad. And then I'm going to choose a gingham. Now, when I'm working with a bold pattern, such as the hearts, a gingham is a nice coordinating paper or pattern that's not going to be too busy or too bold to go with the bold heart. So that's why I like coordinating like a bold heart or floral pattern with one of our ginghams. So I've chosen a gingham that's going to be beautiful, and now I'm going to cut out or trim out our sentiment. Now, what I do to get the perfect border all the way around a little sentiment strip is I'm lining it up with the left side of the guide there. I've held that in place. I've lined my sentiment up, and all of my edges are going to be exactly the same. Let's do this again. Let's flip it around. And with the plastic edge on the left side of that blade, I'm lining up the edge of my sentiment. So I'm going to slide the blade, and then both my top and bottom edges are going to be exactly the same. Now let's do the sides the same way. So I'm going to line up the Y that's on that side with the plastic edge that's on the left side of the blade, and then I can go ahead and slice through that piece. And then we flip it around, and again I'm going to line up the Y. If I pull my little trimmer down here so we can see, I'm going to line up the edge of the Y with the edge of that little plastic slider blade. And now we have even margins all the way around. That's just a super easy way to cut out your sentiment strips. Next, I'm going to cut down that sheet of extra paper that we're going to use to die cut here in just a second. I'm also going to use this kind of aqua paper. It's going to tie in with those different colored hearts, and we're going to use that paper on our die cuts as well. So I'm just going to trim this down. Now, I always like to save my paper and use them for card bases and other things, so I have cut a top folding card base there, you can see to the right, and then I have cut the other half of that cardstock down into halves that I can use as a card panel for the front. I can use for extra die cuts, whatever I need. So I always place that back into my paper sorter. Next, I'm going to pull off those coordinating dies that go with the heart buzzword. I'm going to pull up all 3 large dies, and we're going to kind of set these up here. We're going to use 2 pieces of white cardstock and 1 piece of that turquoise. So for the large shadow piece, I'm going to cut out of white. And to hold that die down, I'm going to use highlighter or Easy C tape. You can use washi tape. You just want to use a type of adhesive that's not going to stick and pull up and tear your paper. Next, we have the scripty word, and then we have that shadow. You see how the scripty word fits right into that shadow piece? That's how you can tell the difference between the two. That and on the scripty piece of cardstock, the words are really nicely formed and pretty. Make sure you place the die blade side down. And next we're going to cut the shadow piece, and that's where we're going to pull in the teal. So when we stack up our die cuts, we're going to have white on the bottom, and then teal, and then white on the top. Now I scooted over the shadow piece because we're going to bring in some more turquoise color in these little hearts that are also in that coordinating die set. Now that I have all these little sentiments ready to go, I can pull out my cute little bitty buzz cutter that I told you about at the beginning of the video. So I've got my little platform pulled out all ready to go. I can place down one of my little mats or my cutting mats. I like to place my little thin one down first. You can see where that has had a lot of love. That is my original mat that came with this die cut machine, and it has held up beautifully. I set my paper and die cut side down and then run that through, and then I can kind of pull that off, set it aside. Now let's set up that sandwich again. So I've got my little plate down. I'm going to put my paper and die cut side down, put the other plate on the top, and then run that through. And this cuts beautifully first time, every time. I don't have to worry about that. And I can pull this back. That little die fell out of there, but no big deal. I can kind of set that aside, and then I can set those aside, and then I am ready to go with the turquoise cardstock. Again, I'm just going to set this up the same way, the little bottom plate down, my dies in, cut side down, run those through easily, and then that heart word, and then all those cute little hearts, I don't want to forget those, they're on that plate. I'm just going to set these aside here so I don't lose them and I can use them on my card. Everything is cut and all ready to go. So now I'm going to get all of my die cuts pulled off, and so I'm going to just carefully remove that. I can pull my die cuts aside, and then I'm going to pop out the little hearts. So you can either push those out with your fingers, or you can pull out the little die pick tool. Use the pokey end and just kind of pop those out. And that is super easy to do with that little die pick. So lots of great uses, as I explained before, with the die pick tool. Next, I'm going to remove the heart scripty word, and you can either poke this out again with your little die pick, or you can gently kind of wiggle it back and forth with your fingers, and then carefully kind of unravel that little piece of paper there and pull that out. Now, another thing that the die pick is great for is all the little centers of the letters like the E and the A. Now let's look at the stack of die cuts we have here. So we have the white large shadow that has the pierced edge, and then we have the turquoise shadow or layer that's going to go in the center, and then we have our scripty word heart that's going to be placed on the top. So let's go ahead and use our Be Creative Precision Tip liquid glue and adhere these die cuts together. So here's that cute little glue stand. My glue can rest there until I'm ready to use it with the lid inside so I don't lose my lid on my messy desk. And one reason why I love to use liquid adhesive on these die cuts is because it's going to give you a little wiggle time. So that means that before that glue has time to set up, you're going to have time to wiggle it around and place it exactly where you want it. I'm using those little tweezers that we have to place everything down. It acts as an extra hand and kind of moves my fingers out of the way. And then I also use the tip of those to kind of tap everything down and get it in place. Now, before I place this really scripty die cut down, I'm just removing any little paper pieces, any of the little fibers that are left over on the edges of the die cut. And again, I'm just going to place a little bit of that liquid adhesive on the thicker parts of this really fine die cut. So you can see where I'm just placing little dots on the thicker parts of that scripty word. Again, I have that trapped in my tweezers to use as an extra hand. And I can kind of place one side down there on the left and then work my way across to the right, placing everything where I need it to go. So I can tap everything into place to get that liquid adhesive to grab hold of the paper underneath. And then I also like to use those little tweezers. They're so finely tipped that you can use that. If there's a little bit of glue that may come out around the edges, use the fine tip of those tweezers just to kind of move that glue away. And so that's just an easy cleaning tip. You can also use the tip of that little die pick tool. Okay, so now we have our die cuts all stacked up, all ready to go. That's going to be really pretty on the front of our card. Now we need to cut our pattern paper, and I have to bring out a large manual die machine for this. You can use whatever die machine that you have, and the reason why I'm using this larger machine is because we're going to use these Sweet Stacks rectangles and the Sweet Stacks circles. So this is my card base, and I want to choose a rectangle that's going to give me a layer on my card base. And so I'm going to choose one that I think may work. I'm going to hold it up here to my card base and see the white border all the way around the edge. So that's going to give you a glance or kind of give you an idea of what it's going to look like. I kind of want my border to be more narrow than that, not as large. So I'm going to choose the next size up, and I'm really liking the way that's looking. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that size rectangle with my heart paper. And because this paper has a very specific pattern on it, it has the straight lines of the hearts, I'm going to be a little more careful when I die cut this and make sure that I get those edges nice and straight just so the lines of my hearts stay nice and straight. Again, I can use that highlighter tape. I'm going to place that in my die machine. This just happens to be the Spellbinders Platinum machine, but you can use whatever die machine that you have in your craft room. Run that through, and then this larger die cut is ready to go. So I'm going to pull out our pretty heart pattern paper, gently release that from the highlighter tape, and let's see what it looks like on the card base. Now, do you see that really narrow layer of the card all the way around? I really like that. I like the way that looks. I'm glad that I chose that size of rectangle. Next, I want to choose a circle that's going to be a little home or a resting place for that heart die cut and the rest of my sentiment. So I can kind of eyeball with the die cuts there which size circle I need. So I'm going to use that die pick and pull that up off the adhesive on the die backer. Next, I'm going to hold my die cuts up and look how nicely that all fits inside there. So that's the perfect size circle. I can set those aside. And then again, I'm going to run my gingham paper this time and my Sweet Stacks circle through the die machine. I don't have to be as careful about placing down or taping down my die this time because that's just a cute gingham paper that kind of has a wonky pattern anyway, and I'm going to kind of shift the design. I'll show you when we put it on our finished card, but now I have a beautiful circle. Next, let's start building all of these pieces that we've done to create our finished card. So I'm kind of getting the lay of the land here. So we have our bold multicolored hearts. We have our cute little gingham circle that's going to go on top. And I'm going to adhere these again with our Be Creative liquid adhesive. So I'm going to run a really fine little bead of adhesive all over the back of that heart cardstock. I'm going to lay it down, and I like to hold the whole card base up because again, that liquid adhesive is going to give me time to kind of shimmy everything's around, make sure everything is nice and straight and my borders are the same size all the way around, and then press it into place. Next, let's add our gingham circle. So again, I'm going to add my liquid adhesive. It doesn't take a whole lot of adhesive here, just a little bit here and there. And I'm going to place it down, and you'll see that I have time to kind of shimmy that paper around and turn it to exactly where I want those little squares and the pattern of the gingham to face. I didn't want it to be straight up and down. I wanted it to be a little diagonal or a little cockeyed. So next, let's add our die cuts. Let's add some dimension here. So I'm going to use our Be Creative tabbed foam dots. And these are a foam adhesive. They're very sticky. You can add these to the back of your die cuts and add just a little bit of a dimension. It's going to make that pop up off of the front of your card. I'm going to grab a hold of all the little tabs and remove those. And once I get those tabs removed, again, I can use my little tweezers as an extra hand. So let me show you that. I'm going to attach the tweezers there to the side, and it moves my fingers and everything out of the way. So it's easier to eyeball where that sentiment needs to go so I can find the center. And then I can press it down, let go with my tweezers, and those die cuts are all ready to go on there. Next, let's add all of our cute little hearts and the "You Have My" stamped sentiment. So I'm going to slip that right down in there between the tall part of the H and then the tall part of the T. We're just going to have it nestle right in there. I can add a little bit of liquid adhesive again because I want to move that around until I get it exactly where I want it to go. So you'll see me fiddle with it for just a second using my tweezers and my fingers to get that exactly where I want it. So I'm going to move it to where it's easily read. You can see all of the letters for the sentiment. And then I'm going to press it into place. Make sure it's all nice and straight. And then again, make sure it's all nice and straight there in the background. Hold it up. And then that is all ready to go. I love that that liquid adhesive has a little bit of a longer drying time, exactly for things like that, when you kind of need to wiggle everything around. Next, let's take those turquoise hearts that were cut using the coordinating die set. I'm going to add just a little dot of glue, and I'm going to sprinkle these in the background. Now, I like to add odd numbers for embellishments. It just is visually appealing that way. And so I'm going to add a large heart and then a tiny one, and I'm going to kind of turn them this way and that so they're not, all straight up and down and not all lined up together. I kind of want it to be a little scattering of hearts. So I'm going to pick them up, grab them with my tweezers, add a little dot of adhesive. It just takes a tiny little bit. And then I can scatter those all around my sentiment and my die cuts. So I'm going to turn my card here and there. I can hold it with my fingers and then let go with the tweezers. And then because we're using that nice liquid adhesive, I have time to kind of shimmy that little heart around before it sets up. So I can get it tilted and going exactly the direction that I want it to go. Let's do another little heart. Let's take another small one. I'll pick it up and then put it in my tweezers, use a little liquid adhesive, and then let's place this one up by the U and kind of have that hang off of the little white sentiment strip just a little bit, just for a little something nestled down there by the H. And I can kind of add that on and tap it down. And then I have 4, so I want to add one more little heart to make a nice odd number. So let's just add one more to the bottom little grouping, add just a little bit of adhesive, and then I'm going to nestle this third one right down in here. So I can kind of place it down, hold it with my fingers, and then remove the tweezers. Now I can use my tweezers to get it facing the direction I want it to go, but also clean up any excess adhesive that may come out just right around the edges. Do you see how I just kind of scrape that away? Super easy to clean up any little adhesive boo-boos. I'm gonna make sure everything's down. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got my odd number of hearts there, and this card is all done. So we've used our buzzwords. We did everything from stamping with an acrylic block to stamping with the Misty to heat embossing with an embossing powder. We did our die cuts. We used our beautiful pattern paper, and here is a look at our finished card. I hope everyone has found some helpful tips in this video, whether you are a new card maker or an old pro. I hope you found some little nuggets that you can take away with you. Thanks for joining me for this Back to Basics video, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.